leading the way toward this goal, both intellectually and practically. Terry Tamminen would be near the top of that list. We're proud to have him as our distinguished colleague at the New America Foundation, where he's Cullman Senior Fellow for Climate Change, and where he directs the Climate Policy Program based here just up the street in Santa Monica. Terry was formerly the head of California's Environmental Protection Agency and Cabinet Secretary and Chief Policy Advisor to Governor Schwarzenegger. He was a principal architect of AB 32, the Global Warming Solution Act of 2006, the landmark bill that proposes to cut California's greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the year 2020. He's also the author of Lives Per Gallon, The True Cost of Our Addiction to Oil. To say that Terry Tamminen leads an active and varied life is almost a criminal understatement, and I refer you to his website, terrytamminen.com, and to the New America website just to get a feel for the range of what he does. But in terms of today, Terry's been a modern-day Johnny Appleseed in attacking the global warming problem. He actively engages other states, national and provincial governments, and cities around the world in an effort to get them to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and to embrace energy efficiency and alternative sources of energy. Today, he'll give us a progress report on those efforts, talk about California's distinctive contribution, and explain what both the U.S. and the rising powers must do in practice to combat global warming. Please join me in welcoming Terry Tamminen.
Thank you, Leif, very much. Very nice to see all of you. It was a very nice introduction, although very humbling. You know, during the American Civil War, the Times of London had a correspondent in New York, and he was getting these lurid tales of what was going on in the Civil War battlefields and sending them back to London. And as you can imagine, the staid British were very worried about actually printing a lot of this stuff because they couldn't verify it independently, and they just couldn't believe that it was true. So nonetheless, they didn't want to fail to actually report something that might be happening. So they went ahead and they published all of his reports from the American Civil War battlefields under the banner, "Important if true." So it is with my bio. I realize that your lunch and my remarks and the Q&A that we'll do after that are the only thing that stand between you and your weekend. It's a beautiful day outside. I'm sure many of you will leave here today and go surfing or moose hunting. So I will make these remarks relatively brief, and then we'll get into discussion, not just Q&A, but hopefully discussion about these issues, and try to cover everything that Leif set up that we are supposed to cover in this final session. But let me first ask you to turn back the clock, maybe not as far back as the Civil War, but imagine it's just 100 years ago. That's not too hard for us to think about. My wife's grandmother, for example, is 102, and I'm sure most of you know people that are around that age, getting close to it, whatever. So imagine it's just 100 years ago, not that far back, it's 1908. The most powerful nation on earth is arguably Great Britain. But it's beginning to be concerned with the rise of Germany and the United States, not to mention its challenge to its authority in India and colonized parts of Africa and China. Now, not concerned with world events, you are focused on starting a new business in 1908. Let's say it's an ice cream business. And you're planning to build your factory and illuminate it with gas lamps. You'll store the ice cream in ice boxes, and you'll deliver it to stores in a fleet of sparkling new horse-drawn carriages. And to process the orders faster than your competition, that guy Ben and Jerry, you will employ a flock of carrier pigeons to speed the messages from stores to your factory and back. Now, you got a young plant manager, and he comes to you as you're getting ready to trick out this new ice cream business, and he says, why don't we instead use electricity, this new electricity thing that's starting to get wired up to all of the American cities, and why not light the factory and power this other new technology called refrigeration with this electricity thing? And why don't we buy horseless carriages powered by gasoline to deliver the goods, And why don't we get one of those new telephone things? I really think soon everyone's going to have them. And we'll take orders at the speed of sound. And he says we ought to do this to be competitive long into the future because he can see the end of those old technologies and the dawning of the new. So what do you do? Now, what does Britain's fading glory and your 1908 ice cream factory project have in common? Energy. Great Britain may have passed the torch of world dominion to the United States for a century or so, but I'd say it remained influential and vibrant and home to a strong economy and a very high standard of living, despite suffering through 2 world wars and countless other global challenges, by embracing the change to new ways of powering its homes and businesses 100 years ago. It was in that first decade of the 1900s that a relatively obscure British bureaucrat persuaded his government to convert the Navy from coal-powered to oil-powered ships, because coal was cumbersome and required extensive manpower, even on the ships. Now, sure, coal was abundant domestically, but England could also enjoy the benefits of oil, more efficient oil, by securing a supply nearby. And in 1909, this obscure bureaucrat helped to form the Anglo-Persian Oil Company and secured the rights to oil in what we now call Iran and Iraq. That conversion stimulated the conversion of Britain's domestic economy to oil as well. And over time, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company became better known as British Petroleum, BP. And that obscure bureaucrat became better known as its nation's wartime prime minister, Winston Churchill. Fast forward to 2008. It's 100 years later, and it's time again to repower our economies for energy security, supply, and environmental sustainability reasons, but without the benefit of knowing how it will turn out, even as we can look back and we can chuckle about how things turned out in 1908 because we do have the benefit of hindsight. But that experience shows us that profound change can happen relatively quickly and that we can adapt. Indeed, to be ready for the needs of our shared environment and our shared economy, we must be prepared to adapt and to change. It's time to listen to that young man or woman who comes to you today as you're starting a new ice cream business and says, why don't we use solar and wind power on the roof of our LEED certified building? And let's take excess power from that roof to convert water into hydrogen for powering the forklifts in the warehouse. And let's get delivery vans that are powered by compressed natural gas or biofuel or hydrogen. And let's measure and register our reduction of greenhouse gases from all of these activities and create credits that we can sell to some poor fool in the very near future who wasn't smart enough to do those things in his or her business. Of course, this young person will probably make these suggestions to you from a text message on his BlackBerry, so don't look for a carrier pigeon. But if he were alive today, I think Winston Churchill and that 1908 ice cream manager or entrepreneur would have realized that subsidizing oil and coal with our health, with the impacts of climate change, and wasted tax dollars for things like wars to protect our access to fossil fuel actually stifles innovation and true freedom. And Great Britain offers us yet another dramatic example of that that even predates Mr. Churchill's innovations. 200 years ago, it was slavery that powered the economies, and free labor meant that no machines or innovation were needed. But once slavery was abolished, England and later the United States unleashed their creativity and their innovation to create machines and labor-saving devices that led to the Industrial Revolution and ultimately the creation of the iPod. It's time to unleash that positive fury once more. And just as technology launched the Industrial Revolution of the 19th and 20th centuries, I believe that technology will unleash the power of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and alternative methods of transportation that will launch us into the clean tech revolution of the 21st century and beyond. But despite these lessons from the past, This challenge is unique because this time we're trying to save more than just a little manual labor. The changes we face today will determine the quality of our life on this planet and the very foundations of our economic prosperity. Now, former Vice President Dan Quayle said, "It's not pollution that's harming the environment, it's the impurity in the air and water that's doing it." I didn't make that up. But I think Shakespeare said it better. Shakespeare said, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune, but omitted, and all of life's voyage is bound in shallows, in miseries and regrets." And I pose to you that we are afloat upon such a sea at this moment. And it is our challenge, indeed our opportunity, to see that tide and shape our future just as England did by abolishing slavery and later by converting from coal to oil. So, what advice should we give to our own Winston Churchill, the next president of the United States, on all of this? He doesn't need to be a rocket scientist or a climate scientist to see that the things that we must do to meet this challenge and to make this transition and to meet our environmental challenges and our economic challenges are the same thing. Indeed, it's like picking up $100 bills off the sidewalk. The solution, Mr. President, lies in 4 parts: renewables, efficiency, markets, and energy democracy. For renewables, let me tell you about a small business in Sacramento, California, OCR Roofing. OCR Roofing was faced with laying off 100 workers because of the slowdown in the housing market. But instead, they're retraining those crews and hiring more workers to keep up with the demand to put solar on rooftops. By thinking green, they're now earning green. And renewables can be harnessed for our transportation future. I drove here today in a hydrogen-powered Honda. And by the way, that hydrogen comes from solar power that is used to electrolyze wastewater. So we get free energy, essentially, and free water to break out the hydrogen to power my car. And in fact, we could get 100% of all the hydrogen that we would need to power the entire transportation fleet of the United States from the Hyperion sewage treatment plant that's a few miles from where we're sitting alone. Now, obviously, you wouldn't do that. But the science shows that that one sewage treatment plant, if you took the water we throw away into the Pacific Ocean every day and broke the hydrogen out of it, you could actually power the entire United States transportation fleet. So instead, think about what every city in this country could be doing that has a sewage treatment plant. They could go into the hydrogen making business. They could wholesale it to the oil companies. That's fine. Let them use their retail network. Let them retail it to us. They could do this in a very short period of time with a resource that we actually spend a lot of money to clean and pump offshore or into our other receiving waters and literally throw away. And this is where enlightened leaders are needed in our government. Government policies actually make these transitions possible. 36 states now have laws that require a percentage of electricity sold to be from renewable sources like solar and wind. Renewable portfolio standards, as they're called. In California, we'll have 20% of our electricity from renewables by 2010 and a third by 2020. And that also means if you produce more solar from your rooftop than you use, the utility must buy it from you. And they sell that to someone else. And this makes everyone a renewables entrepreneur and makes them think about using power efficiently so they'll have more to sell. And that brings me to solution number 2, efficiency. Let me tell you the story about the average American. In the past 10 years, the average American has gained 10 pounds, myself included. And carrying around all that extra weight means that U.S. airlines burn 350 million more gallons of jet fuel every single year. So all of us thick-in-the-middle Americans, if we just lost a few pounds, we would feel better, and so would the planet. And by the way, taking a little bit of extra weight out of your car, those golf clubs that you carry around all the time and don't actually use very often, would do the same thing. But somewhat more seriously, the average American uses 12,000 kilowatt hours of electricity every single year. The average Californian uses less than 7,000, 40% less than the average American. And that's not because we don't have our flat panel TVs and our jacuzzis and our air conditioners in the desert. It's because we passed energy efficiency standards for appliances and buildings, and we put money into incentives to get consumers to buy those technologies sooner than they otherwise would have, which stimulated the economy and got us to our energy efficiency goals that much sooner. By the way, I think Californians tend to be thinner and more beautiful, but that's another matter. And California consumers and businesses are also doing the immediate efficiency things that save money and pollution, like changing light bulbs. You've all heard about that. There's a few in this room that could use changing. A 75-watt incandescent bulb costs $10 a year to own and operate, and a comparable compact fluorescent costs just $3.50 a year to own and operate. The world's largest retailer, Walmart, not widely known as a tree hugger, but widely known as a smart business, Walmart says that if every one of their 100 million customers bought just one compact fluorescent and replaced just one incandescent bulb, that gross transaction together would save those consumers $3 billion. That's a lot of $100 bills to pick up off the sidewalk. And if we keep looking, I think we can find even more of those $100 bills right in front of us. There's a company that's based in Sacramento called Lighting Science Group and Lighting LED Effects. They're going to soon be selling LED light bulbs that will replace the compact fluorescents. And with mass production, they will bring down the price. They use even less energy, and they don't have mercury or other problems, and they last even far longer. So innovation will continue to drive improvements in efficiency. But it does take markets, and that brings me to solution number 3. Let me start, when I speak about markets, with my friend Governor Schwarzenegger. Raise your hand if you've ever seen one of his movies. Okay. Now, leave your hand up if when you saw that movie, you thought to yourself, this is the man who will solve global warming. Well, all right, maybe you didn't think that, but in fact, yes, Leaf credited me with being the Johnny Appleseed that's going around to other states, but I couldn't have done that if it wasn't for his leadership here, getting that Global Warming Solutions Act passed, creating a climate action plan with targets to reduce greenhouse gases that are the equivalent of what this state would do if we were a separate country and had signed on to the Kyoto Protocol. And in the last 18 months, we've gotten 30 other states to join us. And so today, more than half of the US population lives in a state that is doing what it would do as a separate country under Kyoto. And 10 other states have actually put those plans into law. So it's not just something that'll sit on a shelf and never survive whatever administration we're talking about. And 28 of those states have lined themselves up to join one of 3 regional cap-and-trade programs in this country, the first of which, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, 10 states in the Northeast, will actually start trading carbon credits September 25th. It's pre-compliance. The real trading starts next year, but this is the chance to do spring training before the real games begin. And by the way, yesterday I participated in a panel on climate change and carbon markets at Bloomberg in New York that was all kinds of financial geniuses from all over the world, and they estimated that the carbon market will be worth $1 trillion by 2020, and several of the experts thought it would happen even sooner. So yes, we are creating a whole new currency and a whole new way of thinking about what's valuable in our marketplace. And Arnold was able to recruit so many other governors to do this, not because of my persuasive powers, but because these policies for Democrats and Republicans mean opportunity for every one of these states in the clean tech revolution. Renewables, efficiency, and markets mean jobs, which are important to any elected official. And taken together, they show that as a leader in politics or business, you're just plain smart. Think about it. You could spend $1 billion to build a coal-fired power plant, or you could spend about $1 billion to build the same sized solar or wind farm. You'll pay billions more over the life of the coal plant for fuel, and absolutely nothing for fuel over the life of the solar or wind farm. Which would you say is smarter? The coal plant will contaminate our waterways and our fish with mercury, foul our lungs with particles that cause cancer and asthma in our children, and literally steal the breath and the lives of our elders. It will spew greenhouse gases that will devastate the quality of our lives on this planet and end the lives of plants and animals and even humans in places we can't even imagine around the globe. But the solar or the wind plant will stand as clean, silent testament to our ingenuity, to our shrewdness, and indeed our commitment to true democracy. And that's where solution number 4 comes in, democracy. You might say, wait a minute, what does that have to do with oil or solar? Well, fossil fuels won't be around forever, and we're already feeling the pinch of global competition for them, both the fuels and the machinery that converts them into anything useful. So dramatically rising prices are already with us, and shortages are coming to a gas pump or an electricity grid near you very soon. Renewables are much more reliable. Think about it. Coal, oil, uranium are elite fuels, controlled by a few and limited by Mother Nature. But all of us have unfettered access to the sun and the wind and the things that grow in the moving water and the other clean, inexhaustible, renewable sources of energy. That's not just smarter, that's democratic. Businesses run on energy. So by democratizing our energy supply, we democratize our economy and teach the world how to democratize theirs. So there it is, Mr. President. And by the way, I'm sorry that our presidential candidates were not here to hear this great debate this morning. I think there's a lot they could have learned from the discussions this morning. Hopefully there are some advisors in this room that will carry this back to both campaigns. But there it is, a 4-part plan for a lasting national security by eliminating competition for the thing that I believe has caused more wars and more global upset to our peace and our security, hot or cold wars, and that's oil. If we want world peace, we must ensure that everyone has a stake in a peaceful world. And if we embrace renewable energy and the government policies needed to support it, we can invent and commercialize the technologies that make them affordable to the rest of the world. We can build our own 21st century economy by exporting that technology and remain influential in every way that matters, just as Great Britain has done for more than 100 years since it passed that mythical torch to us. So staying with our theme of Great Britain, let me close by quoting one of their famous authors, once again William Shakespeare, who said, "Nature's bequest gives nothing but doth lend. And so when nature calls us to be gone, what acceptable legacy can we leave?" Well, I think if we take this as an opportunity rather than a fearful challenge, an opportunity to grow our hearts and minds around this opportunity of transitioning away from oil and other fossil fuels to these democratic, inexhaustible, clean sources of energy and the technologies that make them useful, I think that's a legacy of which even William Shakespeare would be proud. Thanks for taking up that challenge. Thanks for making it possible. And now I believe the agenda says your questions, your comments, and hopefully, as I said, a dialogue, not just me standing up here talking. I think they're recording, so let's wait for the microphone.
I was wondering if there had been any research on the windmills that make such a racket. Desert Hot Springs has a whole fleet of them, and a lot of people don't want to move in that area because of the noise. And I'm sure that someone must think of a way to keep the wheels spinning around without a lot of noise. So I was wondering.
You're absolutely right. I mean, early in the days of wind farms, it was the speed that was killing birds that made them, sort of both loved by some environmentalists and hated by others. And so by re-gearing them so that now you'll notice that they move around much more slowly, these big windmills, but because of gearing, they actually generate more electricity. They're more silent. They're less dangerous to birds. And one of the other complaints had been building integrated wind, where people, homeowners and small businesses could put small windmills on top of their rooftops just like solar. And actually they make a nice complement to solar because obviously solar on your rooftop takes up quite a bit of space, but a little tower for a couple of windmills do not. You get the solar during the day when the sun's shining. The wind typically blows when the sun's going down or at night. So actually, you can kind of get a twofer off your roof. But nobody had invented a quiet, small wind generator, and there was a lot of complaints from neighbors about that. Well, guess what? Technology wins. There's a company called AeroVironment, which is based right here in California. PacWind is another one, and they both make very, very quiet, building-integrated wind solutions. And certainly GE and some of the other major manufacturers are now deploying larger-scale wind farms that are much more quiet. We'll keep working from this side and work our way across to the microphone. Oh, we have a microphone on that end, too? All right, then we'll go back and forth, but go ahead.
This isn't meant to be a cynical question. You did bring up the analogy of Winston Churchill in 1908, essentially war minister, proposing much more effective paradigm shift from coal to oil. And I'm wondering if that's the necessary paradigm shift would, in turn, nowadays, need to be an oil alternative that would, again, through some sense of necessity, sustain and scale further our war machine. Again, I don't mean that to be a cynical question, but considering the importance of what Churchill proposed, considering how it was taken up, as well as his subsequent career after that. I'm just wondering if the replacement would need to be something that our war machine could endure on.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, I mean, if you think about it, if you just step back from what happened in the early 1900s, effectively what Churchill did was make the UK government a big consumer, which helped to commercialize and bring down the price of oil and the various machines that use it so that everyone else could use it for commerce and peaceful uses as well. And perhaps not surprisingly, if you look at one of the biggest consumers of energy efficiency devices, of hydrogen, of battery electrics, of various other alternative energy, it is the military. They're spending more money probably than anyone else on trying to design these things to be more energy independent in the battlefield. So for better or for worse, I think that is happening once again. There's lots of other peaceful R&D going on and commercialization of these technologies, to be sure. But yes, once again, we heard this morning, I forget what the number was, but the biggest part of our budget is coming from national security. And so if part of them are motivated by different reasons than perhaps motivate some of us, so be it. At least they're taking some of that money and trying to put it into good purposes. Let's go over here. Tom.
Keeping the candidates out of the picture, how do you evaluate the so-called transitional strategies? Natural gas, coal, nuclear, or do you think there needs to be a bridge at all? And what would be your proposal?
Well, let me divide that into what I would do if I were czar, and then what I think is more likely to happen, which I think is inherent in your question. You know, we just finished spending in the last 5 years $1 trillion for a war in Iraq, which boils down to saving 5 cents on a gallon of gasoline, and by the way, didn't even achieve that purpose. President Bush actually 3 times has now admitted that the war in Iraq was about oil. And most recently has said that, you know, forgetting about whatever it was about in the past, it absolutely now is about oil, because he says we want to keep it from the hands of the terrorists, as defined by him. So, you know, again, without getting political or taking sides, the fact is, in 2003, he gave a State of the Union speech wherein he said a child born today should be able to, when they buy their first car in 16 years, should be able to buy a hydrogen-powered car, and that should be commonplace, and that he was going to work for that. And right after he gave that speech, the American Petroleum Institute came out and said, well, wait a minute, Mr. President, that's a nice idea, but it would cost $140 billion to build out a hydrogen fueling infrastructure across this country that would reach all Americans. And probably that much more to repower all of our vehicles, because actually all the cars we have today could run on hydrogen. It does burn. It's not efficient, but it does burn. So you could actually repower all of our cars. And so they said, you'd be talking about, as much as $500 billion to repower the entire country. So, slow down, Mr. President. Yeah, okay, so $1 trillion later on a war in Iraq, and think about what we could have had for that instead. We could have had lots of change left over for fixing bridges in Minneapolis and schools and hospitals and lots of other things, and I'm not just touting hydrogen. We could have done, because I'll be the first to tell you, I don't think there is a silver bullet, only silver buckshot. We do need some of these other transitional fuels for obvious reasons. We do need battery electrics, and there's a lot of money that could have gone into these transitions and into better choices, and we'd be there today. So again, were I king for a day, I would say, all right, well, we always claim we don't have any money for anything. But then when we gin up an excuse and enough fear, we suddenly discover we have it. We suddenly found $1 trillion. So despite our tough economic times, let's find a fraction of that, especially since American business will actually make money off of that investment. You could do it with municipal bonds, for example, where maybe the government puts up the money and then gets paid back by fuel taxes or other things over time. At least part of it, so you could do public-private partnerships and make this kind of a transition much more rapid. Now, that's what I would do, but from a practical perspective, there's a lot of money already been invested in everything from biofuels to battery electrics to T. Boone Pickens' plan. And by the way, my wife drives a natural gas-powered Honda, and perfectly great car, and there's about 250 stations in California compared to the 30 hydrogen stations, so, much more practical, at least at this point. So I do think those are all important transition strategies. Whether Pickens' concept of, let's just build lots of windmills and then that relieves the pressure on natural gas supplies and we can put the natural gas in our vehicles, whether that's necessarily the best balance is something that we can discuss and debate. But I think part of our problem is that we're all looking for one, ice flow to jump from to the next. And there isn't going to be one. There isn't going to be oil replaced by one other thing. We've got to figure out what are the different things that we need for different uses. We open up our...
What's your evaluation of drilling, of nuclear, coal, versus the other transitional strategies?
Fair enough. So drilling is ridiculous without a cap. There's no point in giving the addict more drugs unless you've already figured out how to get him off of drugs. And if we were to cap our use of petroleum, figure out the creative ways and the incentives I'm talking about to try to transition to other things, and then said, okay, we think we're going to still be using oil for 10, maybe 15, maybe 20 more years, so as long as we're going to be using some oil, but it's on a declining basis, we've capped it, we've put the various measures in place, then, frankly, I think it does make sense to think about where we're getting that oil. I wrote a book, as Leif mentioned, called Lives Per Gallon, and I document in there the price that people in Nigeria and Ecuador and lots of other places pay for our oil addiction. And yet we stand here and we say, well, let's protect the coast of Santa Barbara. That's important. But, who gives a damn about the people in Nigeria? So I think it's actually not a bad idea to bring that pain home and have to look at it here. And if there's another oil spill or if there's damage to the environment or damage to our children, let it happen here, because then we'll make that transition all the faster. And let's face it, the footprint of oil that comes from 12,000 miles away, the carbon footprint, is much greater than the footprint of oil that comes from 50 miles away. So, but to just say let's drill more is obviously ridiculous. It can't come online soon enough to affect prices. There isn't enough to actually change the supply and demand balance over time. Clean coal so far is still an oxymoron. We haven't figured out carbon capture and sequestration technology sufficiently to actually make it work at a commercial scale. Might happen, but isn't there yet. And even if we did, it's not just what comes out the smokestack. I'm sure you and many others have been to Kentucky, where they lop off entire mountaintops and destroy people's livelihoods and rivers and watersheds in an effort to get the coal, not to mention what we do out here in the West to get it. So clean has got to be the entire life cycle. As for nuclear, this notion that nuclear is a low-carbon fuel is absolutely wrong. The amount of high-grade uranium that's left on Earth is actually, if we do go on even John McCain's proposal of building 50 or so nuclear power plants very quickly, and given what's predicted in China, India, and some other places, we'll run out of that high-grade stuff in about 20 years. And then you're down to the lower grade, which requires a lot of energy to dig it out of the ground, to distill it essentially, and to move it around, just like oil. And so that raises the carbon footprint of that fuel. The really interesting thing is the high-grade stuff is left in Australia and Canada. And after we've used that, we're going to be getting it from the next two biggest suppliers, the next two biggest known sources, Russia and Namibia. So let's go from being dependent on a limited resource in Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran to being dependent on a limited resource from Namibia and Russia. I think that's a great plan. And then, by the way, we haven't solved the waste issue, obviously, and the amount of cement and other resources it takes to build these nuclear plants. And then finally, I'll get off this topic and move on because I know there's other questions, but finally, if everyone agreed that nuclear was the solution, it still takes a certain amount of time to design, build, permit, and operationalize these things, and we will have long passed the tipping point of 450 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, so it's not going to be an answer to climate change, that's for sure. Other questions? Just whoever can grab the mic, just go ahead.
Here in California, we're infamous for our propositions, and this fall we have a couple dealing with energy. Could you talk about your assessment of both of them?
You know, well-intentioned, but I think propositions are kind of a blunt instrument and don't really give you the chance to get the policy nuances right, and then you're constantly trying to unwind them. Prop 13 is a great example that many of you in this room deal with and look at as an example for good or bad. So frankly, just the short answer is I'm not in favor of either one of them. One deals with transportation fuel and one deals with renewable, the renewable portfolio standard. I think we've got a pretty good one here in California, and it's been tweaked a couple times by the legislature, and that's probably where it should stay.
Very great presentation. I'm John Podesta. Sorry. One observation and one question. The observation is reflecting back on your discussion on the DOD and their spending on batteries, et cetera. I think if you just take energy security and disaggregate it from climate security, that's a problem. They're also the biggest spenders on coal to liquids. And so I think you gotta unless you have a strategy that's doing both,
right.
You can get into trouble, and I think the Pentagon programs sort of are cutting edge of that. The question is transmission. In terms of, you talked about distributed applications of renewables, and particularly in the solar world, but if you're looking at high-density arrays, solar thermal, et cetera, or wind, how much of a problem is siting high-performance transmission in California, and what do you see the solution to interstate transportation of renewable electricity? Do we need new authority? Should there be corridors, solar corridor, renewable corridors for wind in the Midwest and other places?
First of all, I agree with your point about the military spending. We don't need nuclear Hummers. Although I can think of someone who would buy one. The question of transmission is a very important one, because you're right that, look, distributed generation, I mean solar, wind, these types of things on your building or close to your community, microgrids nearby, have the benefit of you don't have any line loss, there's no inefficiencies, you don't have that extra cost of a transmission grid. But individually, just like anything else that you don't buy wholesale, when you buy it retail, it does cost more. And we now have in California, for example, a company called BrightSource that made a deal with Pacific Gas and Electric for what will aggregate to almost 1,000 megawatts of solar central station, and it is thermal, and they'll bring that in fully loaded with profit at about 11 cents a kilowatt hour, so that will compete very favorably with natural gas and frankly with coal when you actually factor in everything that coal's going to have to pay for in the future. So you're absolutely right that we've got to think about whether it's wind or solar or other renewables, how we're going to get them on the grid. And especially in California, it's kind of a classic example. The Sunrise Power Link down in San Diego is trying to bring renewable geothermal from the southeastern part of the state into San Diego where it's needed, and you have obviously environmentalists saying, yes, get that Sunrise Power Link in there. You have other environmentalists saying, no, don't take it through the desert, certainly don't take it through Anza Borrego State Park. et cetera, et cetera. So, and we've got wind in Tejon here and in the Tehachapis that we want to bring down into Los Angeles. We don't have the corridors for it. So, yeah, we do need some leadership, and that's where, frankly, I think our federal government could be very helpful in stepping up and saying, let's look at this as at least a regional, if not a national issue. Let's figure out how to solve this without giving up all of our environmental principles and other values, but providing some leadership instead of just ignoring it or leaving it up to the states to duke it out. I'm told that we're running out of time, so I'm happy to stick around and chat with you guys a little bit longer, but let me thank you very much for being such a great audience and great participants, and leave you with one more thought. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger may not go down in history as being the greatest governor in history or the greatest actor in history, certainly not. But, you know, we heard earlier today in the panel that one quote that I think he will be known for, and the one that really ties all of this together. The science is in, the debate is over, and the time for action is now. And I know that all of you are about action, so thank you very much for what you're doing. Thanks a lot.